The podium format is a new one for Design Miami. We actually started working on it last year as a lighter, more portable version of the fair that we could take on the road with us to different cities around the world. But like with so many other things with the pandemic, it sort of accelerated this for us and given us a chance, let's say, to really test out this format in the fair's original home, not just of Miami, but in fact the Moore Building in the Miami Design District from 1921. Now the Moore Building, which you see here, is where the fair got its start actually in 2005. What you see in the atrium is the Elastica installation by Zaha Hadid, who was the first designer of the year that year. And it's really amazing to be back in this sort of homecoming, let's say, for the fair. Now, we are joined, or I'm joined today by a really incredible cast of speakers. We have Alex Hemingway, who I'm sure needs no introduction as the international head of design at Christie's. And we have Lee Mindel, who is the renowned architect, designer, and connoisseur who was based in New York, but who very graciously agreed to chair our jury for the Best in Show Awards, which you will hear more about shortly. But he was joined by incredible jurors, including Al Iber, the Miami collector and connoisseur, Sylvia Baracione, the chief curator of the Wilsonian FIU Museum in Miami Beach, and our very own Jillian Choi, Design Miami's global director for exhibitions, who you'll also be hearing from in a second. But before that, I'm going to, if you'll just bear with me, I'm going to briefly walk you through just the first floor of the Americas exhibition, which is one of the features of the show. Now, the show is actually spread over all 4 floors of the Moore Building this year, and it includes the Americas exhibition alongside some incredible installations by some of our partners, and of course, beautiful booths by 14 galleries. And unfortunately, we'll only be able to show you the first floor today, but if you want to see the rest, you can browse it at your leisure through a virtual tour that's on the Design Miami website, specifically shop.designmiami.com. But with Americas, and that's Americas with the S in parentheses, what we wanted to do was to at this moment in time, revisit notions of America as an idea, an ideal, a work in progress through the lens of design. We wanted to really reinforce the idea that it's not just America, the country, but America, the Americas region. Again, America as a notion, a place and a thing, a concept to reflect upon. And so we included about 144 works in the end, drawn from both our galleries and independent studios by American and non-American designers alike. And you're probably wondering what those dinosaurs are at the front. In expanding notions of America, we wanted to go as broad as possible. We didn't plan to include dinosaurs, but when the possibility came up through Jason Jock Gallery in collaboration with Granada Gallery, it made us realize that, of course, America goes beyond being a human construct. These creatures were here long before us, and these are real fossilized skeletons from the Jurassic period of an Allosaurus, which you just saw, and a Camptosaurus. Continuing along the kind of geological vein, as I said, we include designers from everywhere, including across the region. And these really wonderful stools are by the Chilean studio GT2P, which stands for Great Things to People. And drawing from the landscapes of Chile, they took volcanic rock, which of course was once molten and then petrified for very long time, for eons, let's say. And they developed a process to reliquefy them or make them molten again. These are called remolten pieces. And then through a variety of techniques, form these new objects. Moving on, we have a number of other works that kind of look to nature. And then moving a little bit closer to the present, but still back through history, we have a number of Native American works, including this really striking circa 1870 Navajo wedge weave textile, which was developed, which was made at a point when the Navajo were kind of innovating their techniques from the classical traditions that they had been using for a long time, developing patterns like the one you see here through a new diagonal weaving process. Just to mention quickly, there are also some 19th century Hopi Kachina dolls to the left of that. You can see we mixed some contemporary pieces. Yeah, there they are. Really lovely pieces that sort of acted as representations of these benevolent Kachina spirits that resided on various sacred mountains and mesas in what's now New Mexico. And then pulling back a little bit, you'll see we have some contemporary and other pieces of folk art pieces. This is a set of walking sticks assembled by Patrick Bell of Old Hope Gallery. And these are late 19th and early 20th century walking sticks, clearly showing carved with the motifs of clenched fists. Patrick says he assembled these soon after the 2016 election, and he calls them Power to the People. To the right, I'll just briefly mention a new piece by the Nigerian-American designer Ini Archibong, which Lee will tell you about later, or he'll go into it a bit more later. If we swing around, you will see some more works of American folk art, including, including this set of 19th century shaker boxes. Now, these have a really wonderful story. They were assembled and displayed like this by the prominent collector Marvin Gleedman for a seminal 1983 exhibition called Shaker Design at the Whitney Museum. The intention was to show the astonishing variety in sizes and colors of these boxes, and you see them here assembled exactly as they were in 1983 for that important show. Next to that, you'll see some 19th century game boards, an Amish quilt, a beautiful blanket chest. There's a 19th century Iroquois wooden bowl on top of it, as well as a stoneware churn, also from the 19th century. So having kind of shown, dabbled in the 19th century, we move for a moment to the contemporary, in particular works by contemporary makers that reflect on history, and through their work try to revisit historical narratives, often politically charged. The platter you see is by Michelle Erickson, and it takes a satirical drawing that was reproduced in 1774 by Paul Revere and superimposes on it the visages of contemporary American politicians in a sort of critique of the current state of things. And behind that, you'll see a series by Duke Riley. Now, Duke is fascinated by American maritime history. Here he is evoking the New England craft of scrimshaw, the sort of carving and painting on whalebone and teeth. But he's applied this vocabulary, let's say, onto found plastic trash that he's gathered from various beaches on the eastern seaboard as a critique of our use of single-use plastics. Now, if we swing around again, do a little half pirouette, we'll see the work of Roberto Lugo. Now, Roberto is a ceramic artist in Philadelphia of Puerto Rican descent. His work is being collected by almost every, it seems, American museum right now. And what he does is he reappropriates historical Euro-American decorative arts typologies and motifs, and applies these different patterns that feature historical and contemporary figures from the Black and Latin communities as a way of, in his words, elevating these histories, and again telling more orthodox narratives through their lens, or revisiting orthodox narratives through their lens. Now, at the end of the aisle, I'll just briefly point out this really rare, early, wonderful child's chair. This is a piece by Wharton Esherick, the one of the godfathers of the American craft and studio furniture movements. He made this in 1931 for the Hessian Hills School, which was a progressive school in Croton, New York, that his daughter attended, and he made a set of these. Well, actually, he made a set of these initially a few years earlier in lieu of tuition payment as a kind of barter. Those were lost in a fire, and he soon replaced these again in 1931. And here is a really rare example from that set. Ending the aisle, we have a piece on loan from the Wolfsonian FIU Museum in Miami Beach. This was a piece, a big wooden medallion commissioned by the Works Progress Administration in the 1930s. As you can see, it has a message that we thought was really interesting to include in the sort of current day, in the sort of current atmosphere. And then that leads to a piece by Wendell Castle, another pioneer or godfather of American craft and studio furniture. Now, this is a somewhat unusual piece by Castle, made in 1964. It's a cantilever chair, and as you can see, it is engraved on its front stretcher with the phrase "In God We Trust," taken from U.S. banknotes, and also produced within the backdrop of the social and political tumult of that decade. This whole aisle is sort of focused more on works of craft and studio furniture. There's some beautiful ceramics by Toshiko Takaezu, a wonderful cabinet by Paul Evans, Poshan Leong, that small piece to the left, an early 1941 George Nakashima, really seminal piece. But then I want to draw your attention in particular to this ceramic work by Earl Hooks. Now, Hooks is someone who I have to admit I didn't know of until we began working on this show. But he was an important Black ceramic artist of the 20th century, making these really fascinating sculptural biomorphic pieces like the one you see here. But he was also a founder of Studio A, which was one of the first Black-owned and operated fine arts galleries in the US in Gary, Indiana. We have a number of other kinds of pioneering figures. I mean, I'll just name drop them. Daniel Jackson with the unicorn, and to the right, Viola Fry and Maya Grotel. And then moving into the sort of more classic mid-century vein, Rudder Table by Noguchi for Herman Miller. This one is from 1949. Incredible lamp and coffee table by Greta Grossman, who emigrated from Sweden to the US and became a really leading figure of mid-century modernism. Another sort of really powerful woman designer, emigre, was Bodil Kjær, who was Danish, but spent some time in the US. She did some really innovative office furniture for MIT and Harvard, also had some furniture featured in James Bond movies, and this is an incredible rosewood desk by her. We, of course, do not want to leave out some of the more conventionally canonical figures of that period. And so the two pieces, well, the one piece above the desk and to the right, both come from George Nelson Associates. Lee and Alex will talk more about the chair in a second, but it was an experiment in synthetic materials made for one of the pavilions at the 1964 New York World's Fair. And then again, above that, that desk is the Beehive lamp by Lucia de Respinis, who around the same period was working at George Nelson Associates, where she designed this piece and was one of the is one of the sort of under-recognized female designers of that era. We're kind of already Gosh, it's going so quickly. We're kind of already coming towards the end of the first floor, and we've again mixed some contemporary pieces with the historical. This wall-mounted piece is by Jae Se-jung Oh, who is a South Korean-born, Seattle-based maker. And what she often does is she takes common household objects, assembles them, and then very carefully by hand wraps them in leather cord. And it's hard to see the detail on video, but they're really remarkable pieces that kind of speak of our culture of consumption and disposal in a really beautiful, in a sort of, yeah, almost paradoxically beautiful way. And last but not least, on this floor, we have this monumental arch by J.B. Blanc, who was based in California, spent a lot of time living among the giant redwoods of that state. And this piece called Wishbone from 1977 is carved from a single piece of salvaged redwood. So that's the first floor of the Americas exhibition. We have, again, 3 more floors of both galleries and the Americas exhibition. Those are all available to see online, which we hope you'll have a chance to do. But in the meantime, to talk more about the gallery program, I'd like to reintroduce our Director of Exhibitions, Jillian Choi.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Aric. Okay, so as Aric mentioned, this year we have really many things happening that are new to us. The Americas exhibition, as well as our tried and true gallery and curio program. We have a reduced scale this year. We have an amazing 14 galleries, including curios. I think it's 10 galleries and 4 curios who have braved the storm and joined us. So we are very grateful for all of our exhibitors. I'm going to quickly take you through. We have here Carpenter's Workshop Gallery, which was started in 2006. They are a longtime Design Miami exhibitor. It was founded by Loïc Le Gaillard and Julien Lombrel. The name of the gallery actually comes from when they first started their gallery in Chelsea, New York. It was out of an old carpenter's workshop. Now they have locations in New York, London, Paris, San Francisco, and they really represent some of the rock stars of contemporary collectible design. Here you will see works by Nacho Carbonell, Studio Drift, Atelier van Lieshout, Stuart Haygarth, and this year they have brought an uplifting presentation of lighting called Bright Futures. And of course, Studio Yob as well, the bananas in the back. We will move next to Jason Jock Gallery in New York. Jason has been working in contemporary and historic ceramic for the last 30 years. The gallery really specializes in contemporary ceramic artists. You will see works by, So actually, many of the galleries have also participated in Podium as well in the Americas exhibition. So you'll see work from Jason's gallery throughout the Americas exhibition as well. Here we have Todd Merrill's studio from New York. And Todd Merrill actually joined us with 2 exhibitions, so we'll see that a little bit later in the presentation. But here he has a solo exhibition of Mark Fish, who works in resin and wood, and these pieces are really phenomenal. And Lee and Alex will go into further detail later. Here we have House of Today, which is part of our Curio program from Beirut. They are a Lebanese nonprofit, and they really focus on nurturing Lebanese design talent. And so we are really happy to have them here, and they have collaborated with Arn Company to have this installation. Arn Company here from New York, also a stalwart Design Miami exhibitor. They specialize in both historic and contemporary, but some of the contemporary pieces here, Katie Stout, Haas Brothers, and of course, these iconic Johnny Swing pieces. We have Mercado Moderno, and this year we've actually had galleries trust us so much that they, even though they could not travel, they were able to have a presentation of their work. So Mercado Moderno, based in Rio de Janeiro, specialize in really the icons of historic and contemporary Brazilian design. You will see here works by Joaquim Tenheiro, Jorge Zalsupin, and many other greats. Converso Gallery from Chicago. Here they have selected a really interesting and body of work by Paolo Soleri, who is an Italian architect that landed in Arizona in the 1950s to work with Frank Lloyd Wright. And here we have a selection of his bells and some of his archaeological drawings that Lee and Alex will get into further detail. Again, here, Todd Merrill Studios as well, with a larger selection of work from his contemporary program. Sorry about that. And Ornamentum Gallery, which is a jewelry gallery based in Hudson, New York. Stefan and Laura have brought to us an amazing selection of not only jewelry, but also a really very fun exhibition called Up in Smoke, that where Stefan has asked some of his artists from the gallery and outside to create work inspired by the new legalized marijuana culture. So there are many pieces, basically marijuana smoking paraphernalia, that are actually quite beautiful, and I'm sure amongst the most beautiful you have ever seen. Carbonell Design Studio is actually new to us this year and part of our Curio program. Vivian Carbonell is actually a Miami-based designer, and this is a whole new body of work created just for the show. This year was really important for us to feature local designers as well as galleries. So we have a few of those sprinkled throughout. Here we have Modern Gallery based out of Philadelphia, started by Bob Abel and now run by both Bob and his son Josh. Bob has been working for decades and really created the best, I think he shows the best in iconic American design. Some of the most beautiful and rare Nakashima pieces are in this booth that he has presented with us, and we will go into further detail later. We have here Mindy Solomon Gallery, a Miami-based gallery. She specializes in contemporary ceramics as well as furniture pieces. And here she has works by Linda Lopez, Dante Hayes, and you can see this Hetler Toulmin chair featured that will be further detailed at a later time. This, I think, is such an interesting curio exhibition that we have new to us. Caribbean Modern is a project started by Rachel Barrett, who is based out of Kingston and London. She's actually an art advisor, but she has been collecting historic Caribbean work for years. And this year she has selected some Jamaican modern furniture from the 1920s through the 1980s, really from the masters. And this is work that was new to me, and I think to a lot of us at Design Miami. They are a really, really interesting collection. And this is really the Jamaican modern masters who broke away from neoclassicism and were trying to create their own modern aesthetic identity. So I really invite you to take a look at this online and see some of this material. Tile Blush is a gallery based in Miami. This year, they have presented a new body of work by Giovanna Gonzalez and Jonathan Gonzalez. This is actually an exploration inspired by kind of the new blending of work and home that we've had, especially in 2020, and really investigating what creative labor means today. So really interesting pieces here. We have here another local gallery, Ponce Berga from West Palm Beach. They are relatively new gallery specializing in historic work. They have some phenomenal pieces this year from Gio Ponti, Nakashima, and many more that will actually go into detail. And now I will actually hand it over to Lee Mindel and Aric Hemingway to discuss a few of our highlights.
Jillian and Aric, I want to thank you first of all for inviting us to see the fair. It's a great pleasure and personally an honor. I think that Design Miami for more than 15 years has been really kind of an axis mundi of design in any given year and a focal point. And it always kind of overlaps our big auction seasons in New York, but always made an effort to get there and always learned and always was inspired. So I'm very sorry not to be with you, but I think moments like this really help us keep the connection and the spirit alive. So thank you.
I also wanted to thank the team, and what a privilege it is to be here. And although I'm not there with you, I am there with you because I feel like it's actually made us closer this distance in a way. Being able to speak to each other one-on-one, examine all these things individually, because in past fairs, you kind of rush through a fair with a lot of distractions and things going on. And this year, through the wonderful advent of representing the virtual and representing the real, we get the benefits of both things, and a way to examine material that we may not have actually been able to examine by focusing on them individually remotely. And as a window to culture and a statement of where we are, Design Miami is the portal to have the courage now to address both of those milieus. And art is perhaps one of the most important things we must keep doing during times of crisis. And you will see in our awards presentation, some of the most creative things are coming out of difficult times, not only in curation, but in creation. So,
Lee, I think that it's so warming and encouraging to see Design Miami going back to the original building this year. And I know there have been historic galleries for a number of years now, but I think it's a very brave step for Design Miami. And to see Old Hope antiques in the show, it's like a midday matcha latte in the winter for me. I mean, it just makes me feel so good to see these antique dealers acknowledged in this context.
Yeah, I even call them kind of cultural referees, because
right.
things we're seeing have such a statement on where we are sociopolitically that they're very moving. And if we start in our historic category, ironically, right here with this first picture in Old Hope Gallery, from 1875 to 1925, these walking sticks were made. And each of them are a kind of thrust to freedom and truth to power. And what could be more relevant now, and how beautifully and they articulate the time we're in.
I mean, the it's such a fabulously pointed, clenched, rather, symbol of the time we're in, as you said. And this motif of the clenched and raised fist is it's a persistent symbol of resistance for years. I mean, from the French Revolution, to the Spanish Civil War, to the Black Panthers, and then today. And I think it might be anachronistic to ascribe all of that politics to these particular canes. It's really their arrangement in aggregate by Old Hope that like a cohort of protesters that brings new meaning and new relevance to these.
Well, also juxtaposed to Aric's theme of the Americas with the flag there with this
right
not completed, it is really beautiful. And one might try to categorize this out of context as Americana, but I view it really as art and a statement of our time. We should move to the next. We talked a little earlier, Aric so eloquently spoke of Mr. Solari, but he has a very conflicted past, which should be addressed too.
Alex. This is a tricky one, Lee, for me, but I'll let you dive into it.
Well, he was a very flawed man, extremely important historically, and he had 8,000 people working with him, but he was accused of sexual abuse by his daughter, Daniela, which put him on shelf for a long time. And then she finally came forward and wrote a very poignant statement addressing this, having been through that trauma herself. And she said that my dad was deceased only for 5 years, and the swell of hate and essays and performances has slowed. Hoping making room now for a more useful perspective that includes not only consideration of his work, but an honest acknowledgement of his flaws. The work that we have to stand on will have to stand on its own and not be seen as inseparable from him as a person, but including both his best and worst behaviors.
It's funny, the Cosanti Foundation, which he founded, released an amazing statement at that time, which said that while Solari understood the need for discipline and limits in urban forms, his narcissism really prevented him from seeing any need for discipline or limits in his own personal life and in his own abusive behavior. But to back up a little bit, Solari invented what's called arcology, which is a portmanteau of architecture and ecology. And in that sense, he should be praised, because this notion that architectural design, and I know I'm drifting out of my lane, Lee, and this is really for you to speak to, but this notion that architecture should provide sustainable solutions while minimizing environmental impact is to be celebrated. But I'm deeply conflicted to see him celebrated because of his, the really dark corners of his soul.
But I think perhaps his daughter is the best statement of that. The other thing that is interesting is that as we explore space and we have our Virgin Atlantic man, considering space flights, this group of drawings are built around asteroids in the space race. So he was looking at communities on the ground, joint communities and communities in space. But being in Arizona and using all natural materials, he really is the forefather of Burning Man too. So despite his flaws, he's a very interesting person, not to be applauded for his flaws, but to be considered for his contributions and his kind of foreshadowing of what is happening right now. Next.
It's very interesting to make this transition to Ward Neschrick, who is in many ways as much of a fantasist as Solari, but on a really a micro level. But where I see Solari as a sort of megalomaniac faffing around in the desert, like sort of Kurtz out of the heart of darkness, Eschrick is so humane, and literally with this work, lifting kids up, using principles of sculpture to create common utilitarian objects. And I just I love his work.
The preceding thing by someone who was not so good to his child, and here we have a man who's doing something for his daughter. Right. And give that love and attention also with the whole immigrant crisis. in separation and so forth, this kind of focus and love of a child and that attention in a child's chair also seems very poignant now.
Have you been to the Wharton Eschrick House in Malvern? You know, I went once as a little field trip with the design department, and it's absolutely transporting. And I have not been to Solari's Arcosanti in Arizona, but I urge you all to see the Wharton Eschrick Museum, which is like a world unto itself. It's just fantastic.
But to see the focus, how a child would be educated in such a small place when we had looked at the previous person who had difficulty with his child in the big universe.
Right.
Very interesting, a dialogue between two separate people exploring two different scales of world. We could go on. Aric spoke so poignantly of this. And despite them being from the Shaker village and the Shaker they look completely modern. I think of Frank Stella's palette almost, and
right.
kind of beautiful obelisk forms that they make. And if you kind of re-look at them and think of them, they look completely different now than they might have done in their context at the Shaker village or where you associated them before. Taken out of context, they become something completely lyrical and very different and transcend their utilitarian thing to become works of art.
You know, the Shakers were always radically modern, I think. I mean, they really espoused egalitarian ideas, communalism, men and women shared leadership roles. They believed in absolute equality of the sexes. They were founded by women. And a really interesting story is one of my favorite moments this year in a very dark year is a cold call that came into Christie's, and a client wanted us to come see an apartment on the Upper West Side in the Ansonia. And we ended up consigning two major pieces by Noguchi, which are in a sale tomorrow night at Christie's. But as I walked into the apartment were these boxes, and the great Shaker dealer, John Russell, who's exhibiting them at Design Miami, and he was literally loading up this box of boxes to take them to Design Miami. And this is a very important collectors, the Gleedmans that Aric mentioned, and they collected the best of 20th century American art, Calder, Noguchi, Cornell, and so forth. And then they lived with Shaker furniture. So it was fabulous, fabulous interior. So,
you know, as an architect, the idea that function can be transcended to become art is very appealing, because these are really functional things that transcend their category. And that tightness of thought and that rigor is what's very rewarding.
But also this notion that that through function you get to decoration, but there's no superfluous decoration here. You know, those swallowtail projections on the boxes.
Just function.
Totally. And it allows the box to kind of expand and contract and without splitting. So fabulous.
You can't take anything away from this or it will fall apart. And maybe that's the question about what is extra and what's not extra. You can't remove anything. The next slide is so interesting. The Brazilians are so magical with art, with wood, that becomes an art form, but it's usually a kind of heavy wood. And this is an unbelievable piece because Jorge Zalsupan grew up, I believe, in Poland, and he was very influenced by the baby carriages, and he somehow could make a lightness of being out of the most heavy of woods and make it appear to be weightless. If you see the vertical fastener where the front wheel is, it supports that deck, which seems to just levitate, and to see something become so light that by nature is so heavy is magical here.
I think the thing that, and Lee, this is a question for you, but I think the thing that knits Sal Supine together with Eschrick and Solari and even the Shakers is this sort of, and it's such an American quality, is this notion of, you know, the sort of the genius in the desert, searching for a better world, always pushing for a better world. And this, and when Sal Supine came to Brazil in the post-war, moving from Poland, which had suffered so badly in the war, there was such opportunity in Brazil at the time. And so I find it very moving in that sense.
Well, seeing his archaeology in the piece almost, you know, you can imagine his past in that piece.
Yeah.
These are wonderful pieces, the Gazelle series, and so rightly named because they all appear to take flight in their anthropomorphic form.
But you see design that right now that is doing things that Johnson did 60 years ago. And they're very impactful still.
Well, this is all done before the advent of a computer too, these castings and everything. And even back to Zaha, Zaha's work is pre-computer. People often think in that beautiful Moore building, but people always think of her as computer generated. And it's not. This is from the soul, this is from the heart, and this is from a real longing to sculpt and express organic forms that seem magical and almost impossible to draw or create. A lot of people have seen a lot of Danish work, but to see something so straightforward that was made for the American market, and it was in the Bond films, of course, but to know that it's by a very beautiful woman from Denmark, I think you would think of this as a man's piece of furniture. And I think those roles really have to be jettisoned now.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have, yeah. Aric and Jillian spoke so deftly of both Nakashima and of J.B. Blanc, and I believe Paul Kazman also has a show of that work going on in New York now.
I think it's just closed. It was a spectacular show, and they also had a big Wishbone piece like this. But it's great to see Jason bringing this. I think that you and I spoke about this, Lee, but it to me, being a lover of California, it is immediately resonates to me, the sort of the geology of California, the coastal, the coast, clouds, waves. I mean, it's all things to me. Air.
This is really the soul of the redwood, is literally in this sculpture. That is the heart of a tree that you can't even get now. And I think it so poignantly expresses the energy, the explosive spontaneity in San Francisco and the West Coast. And by contrast to that, if we go to the next, and the scale of that, if we go to the next.
I find.
Sorry.
Just quickly, Lee, I find there to be such tension in the Blanc, but he's trying to figure out when to stop working the wood and when to just let the wood express itself. And I find that there's a lot of tension and almost anxiety in that for me. I'm sure he didn't feel that necessarily, but I feel that as a viewer of it. But
well, the tension also comes in the resolve of some of the forms and smoothing and the explosion of the others. Nature is so unpredictable, and some of it's so resolved and some unresolved that it catches all the conflict that you see in nature. But the next slide, I think, is a wonderful pairing with this, because we have the West Coast representation of the explosive energy of wood in California with Nakashima's East Coast, very refined version of it. And nothing could express perhaps the coastal differences better than these two pieces. And what makes this piece so unusual is that we normally associate Nakashima with the split pieces of wood and kind of shapes a little more like J.D. Blunt, but his real expertise is in his refinement and how he can reduce things down to their essence, which here is so beautifully expressed out of one piece of wood.
I love that, Bob Abel, the proprietor of Modern Gallery, who said of Wharton Eschrick that Wharton Eschrick was the dean of American craft, but really Bob Abel is the dean of American craft now. And I love that he's bringing this early Nakashima piece. I think the market loves expressive, free edge, big tables with a lot of exuberant personality. I love early and restrained Nakashima. This is like a tour de force to me of craftsmanship.
Sometimes the pyrotechnics of the wood can override the beauty of pieces. And I'm also looking at this, and I think the lesson he learned from the Great Danes, Peter Moose, who never used a nail and had such beautiful, simple resolve things.
Mhm.
And I find this to be a very intimate piece of furniture, actually, and very soft and gentle and expressive of the true talent Nakashima have, and control that there's nobody else like him. And we started with the expression of hope from the old Hope Gallery. And our last piece is an expression of hope through George Nelson's office and his pavilion at the World's Fair. So it's a kind of nice bookending to the hope of the future and what the future poses at the World's Fair. Designed by Ronald Beckman and Ray Wilkes of George Nelson. Also exploring new materials. Should we talk about Gaetano now? We didn't know,
Yeah.
the committee didn't know whether to put Gaetano in historic or contemporary.
So can you tell the audience just quickly, so obviously there's a historic category, which we've just been through. Those are the top 10 historic pieces, and now we're moving into the contemporary category. And we'll go through their 10 pieces as well.
Well, everybody felt that the wonderful thing about Gaetano is he's a contemporary historic. He's not a historic contemporary.
Right.
So it would be best priority to put him in contemporary, because this chair, which was designed in 1984, and he was experimenting with the strength of resin, which is everywhere now, has been reissued, but seems as contemporary as it did in 84, and at 83, he's as contemporary as anybody working now. And this chair, there were, I believe, 10 versions experimenting in its strength. The first, he put very little strength in the resin and the chair fell apart. The second, you could put a loaf of bread on it. The third chair got stronger. A child could sit on it until he got to his perfect version, which is number 7, which is the most comfortable. And it's an honor to celebrate him as contemporary and historic simultaneously.
You know, Pesce, a half century or more of boundary shattering career across disciplines, architecture, design, urban planning, constant drive for innovation, such a key figure in post-war design history, you know, having been a fundamental participant in the seminal exhibitions like New Domestic Landscape at MoMA. I am of two minds seeing this as best in show for contemporary, not because of ageism, Lee, as we spoke about before the show, but for other reasons. I mean, I think the colors are so strong and fresh and updated, and I think to see this chair, the Pratt chair, reappear again speaks to Gaetano's persistent drive for experimentation and really drilling down on an idea. But I think it also speaks to the showmanship of the market, the deft ability of Gaetano, and also Jeannie Greenberg, a great gallerist behind Salat 94, to repackage things for a new market, you know. So it's curious to see it as the top selection for contemporary, not in any way to take away from Gaetano's achievement or
but, you know, above all, the face is smiling on here, and
right.
Use that. We felt this is such a beautiful piece that, you know, derives from nature, not unlike Tiffany, but it's all
absolutely
made out of recycled glass. And, you know, Tiffany can be put in a category, and this doesn't have a category. This can just live as nature.
You know, this is Nacho looking forward by looking back, you know, by way of Tiffany's leaded glass lamps with a quick London tube stop by way of Ron Aird's Chalk Farm studio. I mean, this is, now we're talking. These are upcycled materials. We don't see enough of this in contemporary design. I so heartily applaud Nacho for this effort, and for Carpenters for bringing it. And Nacho talks about this notion of fantasy in his work that allows, I think he said, escape from daily life, but I think this is the complete opposite. This is, for me, this is a stark reminder of the inevitability and materiality of daily life. And I find this one to be very grounding rather than transporting.
That's why we call him Nacho Man.
Right. but it's super dystopian too. I mean, this is, I think Nacho's work is I don't think design should be easy to live with necessarily. I think there should be some things that are, but I think great things provoke and confuse, and Nacho's work does that for me. That's why I think it's really lasting.
Above all that, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Really beautiful object, and it glows, and it has the warmth of nature, and yet it's made out of thrown away recycled glass.
Right.
The next piece is fascinating, and thank you to R and company, because Lebanon is having a tough time now. This piece wasn't chosen because of that, or because it was from Beirut, but it's refined use of ordinary objects and kind of resolving things in a very folkloric, beautiful, functional way. Extremely elegant piece, and the fact that it was made by is fascinating.
I love his strong community consciousness, at the heart of his practice, and that he's employing local craftsmen in the Bekaa Valley to the eastern edge of Lebanon. And his artist statement is such a warm sentiment. He said, I really focus on this is Khaled El-May speaking. I really focus on pushing crafts and finding a way to always keep the human hand the main master element in creating my pieces. This whole approach is so of the moment, but it's absolutely critical that we all begin thinking in this way, I think.
It's not flying shrapnel. It's not out of control. It's
right.
Of the moment, but it's very elegant and thought out, and the palette and craftsmanship is impeccable in that. Let's go to our next. Well, ornamentum, as Jillian had spoken, is really dealing mostly with small scale things, but on the big scale, they made a magnificent tapestry here of found silver trays, which as you look up close, they look almost petrified wood and silver in there, and they seem rather random. But when you take the random and you move them away from them and you make the universal circle, it somehow organizes the world in a beautiful kind of global way there of the random. And that's the idea of the abstract and the resolved working simultaneously.
I wasn't aware of Jaden's work. He's been making these platters for a decade. And I mean, my God, these are spectacular. And this idea of upcycling of found materials that Nacho's also using speaks so much about the sea change right now, particularly in the fashion community. And I bring up fashion for a particular reason, because there's such a connection between jewelry and fashion and design. Fine art is emotional, of course, but I don't find fine art intimate unless it's about you or you made it. But design is emotional, and design is most often intimate because it reflects our bodies, it holds our bodies, it guides the body, and the body is always intimate. So, the arts of intimacy, as I just made that up, the jewelry, fashion, design. And so it's fantastic to see ornamentum in the show. Great gallery, and I'm so thrilled to have discovered Jaden Moore's work through this moment and to keep an eye on it. It's just fabulous.
Okay. What's fascinating about this piece is not only Ini Archibong's roots, but the scale of this piece. One wouldn't know looking at this that this is nearly 5 feet high. And we have come to know in African artifacts what totems are like, but this is a totem that you want to touch and be near. It is a granite status-like thing, and it's ceramic, and it has a white marble inserts in it. And the person who acquired this is actually the president of the Guggenheim Museums, and will be juxtaposing this against a literal African totem with Ini Archibong's totem.
Are you meant to take the marble inserts away and then sort of carry them through the day? Is that the idea?
I think so. I think so.
I find Ini Archibong to be one of the most meditative of the group of designers on offer today. I think, he represents a type of highly polished, not literally, but figuratively, contemporary design that's marked by total precision, fineness. The human hand is almost absent in an otherworldly way. I think he's the spiritual heir to the great post-war Italian designers working in a similar vein, like, Mangiarotti or even Carlo Scarpa. Just this attention to detail.
It's almost like, if you look at the Italians, it's almost like a smooth battuto finish,
right?
In the glass, where you just feel the slight hand of man there. You want to caress and touch.
Right. Nacho is he's a sort of post-apocalyptic commune, with falafel and taking mushrooms, and Ini Archibong is, not having any of that. He's having caviar with his Hermes jumper, and he's highly refined, and so great to see it in this group.
Also, it's, we're seeing a lot of nice scales of things here too, which is interesting. Like if you were to squint, you wouldn't really know what scale that is, but when you see a person next to it, or next to it, it's a very overwhelmingly emotional piece.
Mm-hmm. This exercise of us, banging on about these pieces really makes me deeply sad not to see these things in person, and just to, so much about the power of design is touch, and so I'm very sorry not to hear that.
Each of them tells a story of their artist, and it's connecting with their artist and who they are in their background in tandem with the object, and then how it resonates with you completes a relationship where an inanimate object no longer becomes inanimate. You have a dialogue with it.
Right.
And that's what Design Miami has been so beautiful in presenting. Well, Hetler Tillman has created this beautiful, it seems like it's baskets, but look how beautifully resolved it is. You very rarely see this kind of aesthetic so tamed and so refined in a chair.
Can I poke for 1 minute with great apologies to Jillian and Aric, but I have to say this. I think that, the first 5 designers on this list have all been men, and I think that's a problem. And so I think that.
Oh, we had in historic though.
Sorry?
We had in our historic,
I know, but only a few. I mean, I think that, an object like this could be farther up the list, frankly. I think they have an affinity with Khaled El-Mays, a fascination and a reverence for traditional methods and materials. It's incredibly personal. They work obviously with the NGO and Malawi People of the Sun to revive these traditional techniques, and through business innovation, trying to shift consumer perceptions of what's collectible design. So I think it's great to see them here. I wish they were a little bit higher up on the list. Very intrigued by this chair.
Do you remember when Calder went to Guatemala and did the tapestries?
Sorry?
When Calder went to Guatemala. Calder went to Guatemala, yes, to do the tapestries. That was an interesting appropriation to native fabrication that this kind of is too. Again, this notion of the found object, those are all collected birds, and they could kind of be perceived of as a collection of Hummel or kitsch if they weren't in the deft hands of Stuart Haygarth, who takes these ordinary collectible things and, again, under the umbrella of the sun and the circle, collects them in a profound way, which their critical mass makes them no longer seem mundane. They seem new, refreshing, and beautiful.
I love that you said Stuart has deft hands. I mean, that's exactly right. And I think that, as our relationship to nature falters in this moment, I think that animal forms they really hit a nerve in the market. And I hesitate to bring up the Lalondes or Judy McKee, but you know, love to see this type of work, but these are still beasts of burden. You know, they're still controlled by the forms of man. They're still bound by Stewart's, you know, geometries. So, but God, what a winning piece. As my mother would say, though, how do you dust that? You know, she's always worried about how you dust things. But I love this lamp.
Well, it almost looks like the sun is shining on the birds there. You know, it's,
right.
It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And again, the notion of the literal with the abstract, taking the collection and painting it by putting it in the circle, gives it discipline. This ethereal collection just seems to take flight like winged Nike. It's made out of resin and you can't tell how it's standing up or what's holding it. And it still is a useful object, but it just seems to be levitating. And it takes advantage of a new material in carved resin.
You know, you mentioned resin, but it's also wood. I mean, it's also laminated in wood. And I think that Todd Merrill should be celebrated because he has really championed designers that have completely pushed the boundaries of woodworking, whether it's Joseph Walsh or Mark Fish. I just don't, even if this doesn't appeal to your personal taste, I don't know how you can't be moved by what these designers are doing.
Well, you know, if you look at the antecedents of this in an earlier time, somebody like Tapio Workala was kind of navigating the same things. For those unfamiliar with him, he was a Finnish artist who got to forms not unlike this, but in a very different period. The way he achieved it was kind of pre-resin and wood. He was a cabinet maker, woodworker, sculptor, and he would take sheets of plywood and glue them and stack them into a large sandwich, not dissimilar to the way the kind of almost sediment lines of the resin look in the curvilinear form there. And then he would carve randomly through that in a way that's, I'm sure this gentleman was influenced by him. So he got to his forms with his technology by carving through blocks of wood. And this is wood and resin with not a dissimilar kind of approach, but nevertheless liberating itself of all the boundaries associated with woodworking and resin. A great woman designer. And by the way, Alex, these were not in necessarily any order of preference. So if you'd like to make the chair number 2, you can do that. Okay.
Well, I think it's always important to have a critical voice in any conversation. And so I offer that up as a small, you know, critical voice a few minutes ago.
This artist is so interesting. And also she heads up the metal department at Cranbrook, which is so much part of American design history. Ironically founded by the Finns, if we go back to Mr. Workala, because the Saarinens, father and son, came over to found Cranbrook. And here we see German-born, another emigre, Iris Eichenberg, still making beautiful things, implying a centerpiece of stalks of flowers, using leather and metal to thrust up in a kind of exuberant way, but a transparent way when at a table or so forth, you can still see the person sitting across from you, but triumphant. And I don't think of Bertoia. People have mentioned Bertoia, but I think of resurgence of nature in this thing and transparency. We end, ironically, in the book ending to Gaetano Pesce with Orta Miklos from Holland and France, who was fascinated with the California culture and uses resin and uses weaving that we've seen in a lot of the things in the seat there in the Beirut piece, and also brings a slight European tendency coming from Holland with the De Stiel and Theodore van Doesburg and Vermeer, oculuses and layers of planes. So how poignant to kind of link, bookend a gentleman who's been doing it for a while with a gentleman who's been influenced by him and finding a new way to express the idealism of the baby boomer generation.
Well, the power in this object is is in part the form, but also the concept. I mean, this is such a mashup of references, whether you've got Rick Owens's, referencing surf culture, or you have Gaetano Pesce's use of materials, or even Max Lamb. There's all sorts of things going on here, and I love it for that reason.
Mm.
This is the mashup culture we live in now, and I think this is this speaks so poignantly to that.
It seems, relevant to celebrate the two awards programs, but more importantly, to celebrate what Design Miami has been able to achieve in the most difficult time, and that is to reinforce the culture, to bring it to the world in a world that's somewhat shut down now, but open things up for all of us. And we have a lot of gratitude to them, the gallerists, to Aric, to Jen Roberts, to Jillian, to all the gallerists and all the artists who make us realize we are all communicating and together and able to help each other now. And this is the best example of that.
Well, on that note, we have to thank you, Lee, first of all, for leading our jury and coming up with this really wonderful list of best in show winners, and you, of course, Alex, for joining us in this talk. It really is inspiring to hear both of you reveal the depth of these objects through the depth of your knowledge and insight. It kind of reminds us of why we all do what we do, which is that we can sort of appreciate these objects as objects, while also in turn seeing them, understanding them, thinking about them, and this is for you, Alex, even debating them in different ways. So we have to also, of course, thank all of our viewers today for joining. I'm sure I speak for all of you when I say that I wish we could do this for all the objects in the show,
right,
with Alex and Lee, but in the meantime, or alternatively, please do feel free to go to the Design Miami website. I should say shop.designmiami.com, where you can see every object in the show, both in the Americas exhibition and via the galleries. And there's also a kind of amazing virtual walkthrough that you can do, virtually walking through the physical space at your own pace. So again, thank you all. For those who are able to make it to Miami, we hope you can come to the Moore Building by December 6th. For the rest of you, we hope to see you online and in Miami next year. Thanks again.